Hello.
Welcome back,
Welcome
guys.
back. So 6:45 in the evening. 6:75.
We're nearly into hour 7.
I know.
Almost.
And we've raised 8,430. Richard Vobes, thank you very much. He's put the call out because obviously we've only got to open that YouTube channel yesterday, just to see if we could stay on. He sent a lot of people over. So welcome, Richard Vobes viewers. Thank you very much for supporting us. We've got the delightful Alex Thompson coming on.
One of my personal faves.
Any minute now, I do believe. Let me just check he hasn't emailed that he couldn't get in the link or something, because he is due in any minute now. No, he must have the link, so he must be joining. So yeah, we've got Alex Thompson coming up. After Alex, we've got Adele. Adele might be a bit late apparently, and if she's not, Kat said she was gonna, I'm not gonna say it because we'll have to hold her to it. I don't think she needs her hands. She said so. We've got Adele, and she's part of the team of Public Child Protection Wales. Then we've got the lovely George Sandu, who's going to be talking about the porn industry. Then we're going to have a set from the lovely DJ Slipmat.
And the pre-recorded interview we did with him as well.
And then we've got Dave Sumrall from Stop Hate. But I do believe your favourite, my favourite, our favourite, Alex Thompson. Hey, Alex.
Good evening, ladies. What a pleasure to see you on this podcast-athon.
What a pleasure you coming on.
To see you. How are things?
Pretty good, thank you. I've just got back from an extended trip abroad. I was doing language studies, so I was squirreled away for longer than I would longer than I would normally be. And you can hear me struggling to speak English. That's how long I've been away. But it's all right. I've come back to a big pile of articles to edit for UK Column, but that's all good.
Fantastic. So we're doing this. We're screaming about it. It's becoming more and more crazy out there. What are your thoughts about what's going on now and the mutilation of our children and the fact that women are just becoming non-existent, really? They're trying to do away with us.
That last observation, Lou, is the key one, isn't it? A lot of footage is starting to come in of ladies in various parts of the world now, Western world anyway, saying, here I am out in public and I'm looking for the toilets, and there's a men's toilet and there's a people's toilet. Women have obviously been abolished. Now that is not by accident. I mean, I might as well go right down to spiritual bedrock, because you don't want superficial commentary. The devil has always had a particular hatred of womankind. There's many spiritual reasons for that. The purity and innocence of women, their generation of life, their association with children, his knowledge that if he targets women and childbirth and childbearing and makes it unattractive to women, he will reduce the number of people in the world, and people are made in the image of God and remind him of Christ. All of these reasons. So yes, women are the ones who are being abolished. And we know what's happened to Kelly J. Keane, which we've covered on UK Column News. Posey Parker is the other name she goes by since we last spoke. And just a few minutes ago, I saw the first footage I've ever seen from, I think, a Black American school of a very muscular teenager who was sympathetic to or identified as trans, trying to kill in the school playground with heavy punches a girl who apparently had said, I do not want trans people in the girls' toilets at this school. So something has really flipped, and it's women who are marked for destruction. That's clear enough.
Yeah, it is absolutely clear. And the woman has been eroded,
because it was a few years ago we were saying that the heterosexual white male is going to be totally non-existent. They're trying to do away with it. Well, now they're actually just trying to do away with women completely.
What's gone on there is Brian Gerrish has long said, in a friendly overture to homosexual people who in many cases of course share our moral disgust at what's going on, and they're a notable presence at UK Column and on my Telegram channel, and we always respect them. But he's always said to the ones who are more narrative compliant and who are saying, what do you have against gays? He said, do you realize, dear people, that they're going to turn against you very shortly? And, on the transhumanism, which is what this is all about, is on the way to post-humanism, because trans is still moving towards something. Post-human dictatorship will just regard us as bodies, and it regards women as just as the devil does, as inferior. I mean, one of the things the devil hates, and all spiritual traditions say this, not just Christianity, the devil hates our sexuality and our reproduction. He's oddly fascinated by it, but he thinks it's filthy, like everything that's physical, beneath him, because he's pure spirit, right? So sexuality and anything that's suboptimal from the point of view of a devil who wants an army of robots or soldiers will be abolished. And women, of course, are regarded as weaker, out of action a lot of the time because of how their bodies are constructed, and therefore not suitable for the workplace or armed force that he wants.
Talking about transhumanism actually with Sandy Adams earlier, and she was talking about post-humanism, and she actually read out the definition of post-humanism off Wikipedia, and then it reminds me of A Brave New World.
Yep.
Yes. Huxley was very close to the action, because Aldous Huxley heard a lot of it from Julian Huxley, who was very instrumental in the agencies of the UN after the war. And Aldous Huxley was, you've probably seen the interviews with him in the 50s where he's charming the socks off the Americans with his suave voice and saying how regrettable that we're moving towards this totalitarianism. But he moved to California after the war, where he'd spent time between the wars. That inspired him to write Brave New World, a visit to San Francisco. And he became a sort of smiling granddaddy figure in the early wave of what in the 60s became the general drugs and counter-revolution culture. And he was smilingly overseeing it. He thought that drug-assisted utopia was the way to force people into, well, again, it's persuading them that they don't want family life, private property, etc., that they want to live in a commune, dressed up nicely, producing for other people. So Huxley was well on board with this, and he knew what the game was. He was writing even a full century ago about ectogenesis, so producing babies in fake wombs, artificial wombs, which is now being pushed at us again.
Yeah, that's what's so frightening about it, because obviously he wrote A Brave New World in, I think it was the mid-30s or maybe even the late 30s, but it was supposed to be 600 years in the future, and here we are 90 years later with it pretty close.
Playing out.
Yeah. Sci-fi has got a long track record of this. The same was true in H.G. Wells's day. He lived. Did he see the Second World War? I think he did just about, but he was certainly still thriving during the First World War, and a long time before that. He was the first generation of modern sci-fi, very, very much on board with globalism. He famously wrote The Open Conspiracy, talking about training people to accept a world state, and saying we'll probably have to dispense with a lot of people along the way who won't go along with it because of their silly old-fashioned ideas. But H.G. Wells was also seeing the splitting of society into the Eloi and the Morlock. Remember, the effete ruling class who are asexual, and the Morlocks who are still, despicable sort of manual labourers who still are, again, in two sexes. So this is a long-term agenda, and it comes from largely from the British elite. The eugenicists thinking is the glue that binds it all together, and one of the ways that the British deep state has kept its distance from attributability here is by distancing itself from it, either by attributing it to nasty German or Russian dictatorships, or ascribing it to many centuries hence, like the old Bugs Bunny cartoon Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century. So the idea, the plot for Brave New World actually came from Yevgeny Zamyatin, a Russian emigre who lived in Tyneside and London, if I remember correctly, in the First World War, and he was repelled by what he saw in the British deep state and the intelligentsia, and wrote about it in several books. And he wrote the model, the crib, which was nicked by Huxley for Brave New World. The original is called We. You can get at least two translations of it in English, and he envisages the world state. And like you were saying a moment ago, he puts it several centuries in the future. But this is a well-known device by writers to say that this is coming soon, and to avoid looking too shocking, I will place it longer in the future.
Yeah, it seems to be that way, because it certainly has. When I read that, and it wasn't even that long ago, it was about a year ago, and I thought, oh wow, I can see exactly where this is going, and it is actually on our doorstep. And we were talking about it earlier, how quick. So initially, obviously, they had to drip, because of the traditions and morals and values that people would have held back then. They couldn't have just, you know, put this on us immediately. It had to be drip fed into us for decades. But then all of a sudden, like in the last, I would even say like 5 years, but probably even less than that, 3 years, it is just exploded.
Yeah.
Like, and we look what we're seeing now. We're having debates whether we think drag queens should be able to gyrate around in front of children and this is bizarre.
Yeah, it is. But you get a tipping point, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about Aldous Huxley there a full century ago now, and it's often overlooked that the first generation of free love, atheism writ large, do as you want, do as you wish shall be the whole of the law. That was a century ago. That was, I mean, ultimately it was in the aristocracy. It was there already in the Edwardian era, so 120 years ago. But it didn't hit a sizable number of people like the Oxbridge class until the interwar generation. That was the seedbed out of which the 1960s revolution came. But even then, you know, not everyone, thank God, went to university and had their minds fiddled in the baby boomer generation. Many of those who did go managed to keep their heads. It took another 2 generations until, and Britain's ahead of the curve in this regard, everyone was told, you must go to college, whether you wish to be a nurse or anything else, you must go and be professionalized and academicized, and leave thinking you know everything. And along with that goes, you know, having been in this over-sexualized, trite culture of a free-for-all, deliberately designed. Timothy Leary was another one planning it. You know, there was a lot of planning going into it on both sides of the Atlantic. Now we've reached that curve, and if you listen to the recordings, which are coming thick and fast now, of shocked parents or even shocked pupils doing surreptitious recordings themselves in the classrooms of the sexualization and the squashing of dissent on sexual opinions. What strikes you is these teachers, even if they're my age, in their 40s, they sound immature, they talk immature, they use childish vocabulary. We've now reached that cusp where we've got children teaching children to bring up children. So that's why it goes more quickly than ever before, because 2 or 3 years now is a lifetime because of the immaturity of these people and the average age of those who it's talking to. You know, and COVID certainly didn't help because it put everything on pause for 3 years and put people's development, a lot of children and young people's development went backwards. And so there's ways to play with people's mind now in the space of 6 months to a year that would have taken a decade or more.
Yes, I see your point, actually.
You know, you were saying about children teaching children, but they are actually doing that as a way of getting to the young ones. We were talking with Matt Letitia earlier, and what they're doing in the schools is they're getting, so when you're in your junior school, you'd always look up to, if the seniors came down and spoke to you in the class, you know, you'd always look up to the big kids. So the big kids, the cool kids now are being sent down to the younger little ones and teaching about how cool it is in LGBTQ and how great it is that they can be this different gender, and they're kind of going to, I mean, this is abuse on every single level for both those senior schools.
They're all being groomed. They're all being groomed. Even the adults who groom the older children are being groomed. Yeah,
no, it's a cycle of grooming. But the good news is any generation or any plank in this cycle of victimization can jump out. At some point, it will be cool and rebellious to say, I believe in the heterosexual family. You know, that there's already, you know, for a few years now, there's been on the ethno-nationalist scene, which is to most people what they would call the far right, though I wouldn't use that term. There's already been this sense of being countercultural and edgy by marrying early and living cleanly and having lots of children and bringing them up well with respect. That is spreading.
There is, yes. A revival.
I think that's what needs to happen to tip it back over, doesn't it? Because as you say, there's a few generations, certainly, and that's picked up in the last couple of decades, but particularly the last decade. But there's a few generations who really have been damaged by this, and we're going to see it, you know, in the next couple of years as well, for the period that these children now in their adolescence, usually young girls, it is a really scary percentage of girls this is now, who are going to go through this process. They are going to go down the puberty clock, because we're still, even though it is changing, there are still some, and the ones that have already done it, there are plenty. We were not talking about this earlier, weren't we? About the whole there's a whole big other side to this that nobody's seeing, and that's the detransitioners, those who realize they've made a mistake then in the transgender community, and they're desperately trying to speak out, and nobody is allowing them to, you know. So they let's glorify it all up while they're young and show us, you know, glamorous and how cool it is, but we'll hide what actually does happen to
After
a
the
lot
fact.
of them after you do these things, you know. And it's like the brain process of the child is so delicate at that stage, and we all know it because we've all been adolescents, so we know that that period is the time when we take the most risks, and we get led astray, and we, you know, we got the peer pressure and all of that on top with our hormones changing, and they put this in front of them, you know.
Yeah.
And we've got, well, like I say, a generation, probably two, damaged by this already.
But, you know, even at the height of that rebellion, maybe aged around 15 on average, there is something in the brains, the souls of even the most wayward adolescents that says, I know which people love me and want the best for me. And they don't waste energy fighting against people who they know don't love them. So if their parents or mentors are not giving them the sense of wanting the best for them, they won't even expend any energy on them. Right. So where there's a fight going on, there's some hope that you can get through to them. You know, there's the brain, of course, is so plastic at that age. Although that too is being misused now. We've reported recently on UK Column that quite callous, I would say, adult rapists, by which I mean late teens, and I would call them grown men, who rape girls of younger ages than that, routinely in Scotland, and now we're seeing cases in Northampton and various parts of England as well. It's more pronounced in Scotland because there's a body of doctrine to go with it now. The continent's the same, certainly here in the Netherlands. They are being let off, and we don't want to be shock value for the sake of it, but we've started calling that the first rape is free. And this is a deliberate policy, and it's based upon the lie that brain chemistry should dictate criminal law. Right, so that's a couple of neurologists say our brains aren't really fixed till we're 25 or 30. So tell you what, if an 18-year-old rapes a 15-year-old, we'll just let him get away with it.
Oh, so there's using that on the flip side as well, then.
Yes, yeah.
I see what you mean, like diminished responsibility, kind of.
That's it. That's what they're going for. Because you know, the smart money. The smart commentators like John Waters, who saw this coming in Ireland because, you know, he was one of the most eloquent of these estranged fathers, who was being blocked by the courts and by a whole web of people. Stephen Baskerville is the academic who's written whole books on this, and he has a blog spot on it as well. John Waters was saying back then, in the 90s already, that the aim was, well, I think actually in hindsight he realized it, he had a sense of it in the 90s, that the aim of blurring the division between adults and children and blurring who had custody of children was about turning everyone not into adults, but turning everyone into children. Right? Again, it's satanic, and I don't use that word lightly, because what would the devil prefer? People, you know, sound mind in sound body people, or completely confused, all at sea people who have strong adult bodies. He wants the latter, obviously, because he can do a lot more with them.
Yeah, and that is a huge goal, is diminishing that line. You know, these people who write these policies and these, you know, with a paedophilic undertone, and the people who are writing these education, and, you know, they don't, and the organizations being used, the big lobbyist group, they don't believe in childhood innocence. They believe children and adults are on the same line. Obviously,
it's all about rights, a right to pleasure, a right to discover, all these things.
Yeah, a right to do anything they want, and, you know, that, I suppose, do what thou wilt comes into this as well. But it is just so dangerous that this is even, you know, for anyone to say there's no such thing as childhood innocence really freaks me out. I can't understand that at any level at all. But there are people out there who genuinely believe that there's no difference, and therefore they should be able to experience sexual pleasure. It just, I can't, my mind...
I'll tell you, where the foot gets in the door here, the thin end of the wedge, is when people say, you know, who are usually sort of on script with the modern globalist message, but when they hear people say that there are such things as gay children, and say, "Excuse me, I agree with the rest of what you say, and it's all nice, but there are no gay children. Please don't mention sexuality and children in the same sentence." The response that is given by the campaigners is, "Well, I was a queer child, and I knew when I was 5 years old that I was different." And people say, "Okay, fair enough. That's your lived experience." You've got to squash that, because it's disingenuous, and it is getting the foot in the door for there is no such thing as childhood.
Yeah, exactly. And I've had this conversation or this debate or whatever on Facebook numerous times, where I've said that. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
No childhood.
Jason just came in and I got lost it. Sorry, what was we talking about?
It was about the campaigners saying there's no such thing as childhood.
Oh yeah. Sorry, from whether or not they knew when they were younger. So from that point of view, anybody who was young, knowing what sexuality they were, have been exposed in some level, and people will argue that no, they haven't, but they have been, and they've been exposed in some way to even discuss it.
Yeah, so the first retort, if you want to be kind, and you have to be kind with these people because they're disturbed, and to use the Romans 1 phrase, their minds are darkened, right? The first phrase to use is, well, who told you, or who made you know that you were a queer child?
Yeah,
where did
exactly.
you get that from?
Where did you get that information from? Because it's come from somewhere, hasn't it? At that stage of life.
Alex, I wanted to ask you about the talks this week about the United Nations looking to do away with laws about adults and children having sex in the name of children's rights, therefore child consent. Give us your input, because we knew this was going to come, didn't we?
Yes, if you go to, it was this Monday's UK column News, David Scott did a whole segment on this. Once again, to return to our initial theme, it was deliberately released for International Women's Day. Now, isn't that interesting? The 8th of March, right? They could have introduced it on, there is such a thing as International Men's Day, there are all kinds of other days, but no, Women's Day. And they started off with rights for women and girls, no violence against women and girls, all the uncontroversial stuff. And then when you get to point 16 or 17, it's no criminal law for anything sexual. Let everyone have sex with everyone. Age should be no barrier. Where on earth has that come from? Well, we know where it's come from the perverts who work for a lot of UN agencies. Again, David Scott is in the lead in the UK column crew because he wrote a piece, I think I referred to it in a previous stream with you, called Curiouser and Curiouser. The term, of course, is taken from Lewis Carroll, who himself was a pederast, as we know. But David had noted that Peter Newell and his wife had written the 3-volume implementation handbook for the UNICEF manual on the rights of the child, wasn't it? Oh, right. So okay. the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is what everyone touts. There's a 1989 version and various other emendations to it. But the 3-volume, basically the manual for telling people in detail how to implement these high-sounding phrases was written by a convicted paedophile.
Wow.
Still in use. So these, like moths to a flame, perverts are attracted to speaking on behalf of the world's children. Of course they are.
Yeah, of course they are. You're right. Yeah, the same as they're going to find places with access to children, and that's in institutions, isn't it? Schools, care homes.
I mean, my big question is, Alex, with there is starting to be a lot of exposure about what's going on in school. You are getting stories in the Daily Mail here and there about what's going on. And my big question is, where are the dads?
Well,
there are teachers talking to your little children about masturbation, and you're not there. Are you okay with that? As somebody that you have no idea of their background is sitting down with your 3 or 4-year-old and having this conversation.
I have seen.
Does it right with you?
No, not at all.
No, exactly.
I have seen. Predictably, it was in America. I think in a southern state. One dad, I think he was African American, did go to a school and said, "I'm not going to argue with you. I've heard what you've told my children. If this is done again, there will be blood." Right? That's an extremely male reaction.
Yeah.
But it worked. It worked.
Yeah, which is why it's weird
I just
that you
don't
hear about
understand
it
here
more, isn't it?
why the dads aren't down at school gates.
It's got to be because they don't know, because we all know most, I mean, obviously, if you're a good father, that your children are going to be top priority, and it will be enough to send you into a bit of a rage. That's why I think that, again, it comes down, even most people got to think we're lying. Look, it must be a non-believable thing as opposed to not really caring about it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, no way, that couldn't possibly be happening. So they just sort of flip it off as if it's not. It's got to be, because otherwise you would hear, whether we hear it through social media or whatever,
exactly.
that somebody's gone up the school, kicked the door off and grabbed the teacher.
Yeah.
Perhaps it happens more than we know.
Perhaps
I
it
wouldn't
does.
be surprised if there's a blanket
gonna
ban on
say
it.
that,
you
you
would
don't
have
get-
thought we would have seen something
At
across,
least on social
on
media.
somebody, one of our people that we're linked to would have picked up on something like that.
You probably couldn't hide it completely, but
No.
I know. I mean, if you were a mainstream media reporter and heard that a father had perished the thought, grabbed a teacher by the lapels, and said, "This stops now," would you report it or would you hush it up?
They'd hush it up.
Or they'd turn it around that he was far right Nazi.
Yeah, and he came in and punched the teacher or something, just made some nonsense.
Yeah, it'd be spun.
Yeah.
It'd be spun because, that's the main thing that people get called at the moment. You're getting taken down. The minute you're taken down, the minute you're called a Nazi, a racist, the list,
Bigot,
homophobic, a bigot,
homophobe,
you've won really, because
Yeah.
they've got no argument.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, the next generation of fathers, I hope, we can't wait that long. But by next generation, I'm thinking of like 5 years' time, because as we were saying, generations pass very quickly now in this degenerate culture. I think they will be much less concerned, or maybe even wear it as a badge of pride if they're called these labels. The old guard of, sorry about the honking of the horn outside, but the old guard have been distinguished, the conservatives and family values crew, distinguished by their cowardice. Whenever anyone says racist, sexist or homophobe, they have cowered. Yeah. And I think the current generation would realise that the choice is, as one person memorably put it, between losing while you're being called a racist or winning while you're being called a racist. Those are the two options.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, there's a lot of effect on the young, like if you ask this, if this was the situation even back 40 years ago, how things would, like speaking to somebody who was, perhaps in their 70s or 80s, in the 60s or 70s, if you could have a conversation with them now, like what the reaction would be. I wouldn't even say, it wouldn't even be 40 years ago. I'd even say 20,
Correct.
10 even. That's how fast it seems to have come up, and all of a sudden, like I can think of times when I would probably be down my dad was a rugby player, and I used to be down the rugby club a lot, and I can imagine this conversation a few years ago, right? And I know where it would be laughing, it'd be like, don't be so ridiculous, that's a load of nonsense. But then in the other breath, then a lot of those people have just rolled over, and maybe they're not actively to the left, but they don't say anything either.
I
don't
think
speak out.
Within regards to this country, it all started, the push was Tony Blair and this whole diversity thing, making the UK the most diverse country. This is where the big push came with, everyone who knows me and listens to my shows knows my thoughts on Tony Blair. I'm not going to get triggered right now, it's a bit too early. But I don't know how you feel about that, Alex. There was a big push, the whole diversity thing.
It was in that Blair government, and people will blame us for saying this, but not that I care. The first stone that was removed that allowed this foundation to crumble was precisely under that early Blair administration, that both England and the devolved administration, certainly Scotland, removed their ban on the promotion of homosexuality in primary schools. That was the first stage. And if people scoff and say, well, are you saying that a homosexual can't be a lovely, caring teacher? That's not the point, because such homosexuals will shut up about their so-called sexual orientation, just like any other teacher will shut up about their bedroom activities and proclivities. But what it did was allow the course of school teaching and the mold of school teaching to be changed into, here I am, you must celebrate me. So one of the most widely shared clips of this year by Turning Point UK, I think it was, early this year, was of a bitchy, that's I think exactly the right word for him, bitchy school teacher of about my age saying, I was a repressed gay in school, and I'm not going to tolerate. You remember this clip, don't you? I'm not going to tolerate any of you doubting any of the homosexual agenda. It's my job to squash you.
Yeah. We've actually got Nick Tanconi coming on tomorrow from Turning Point UK. He's doing fantastic stuff. He really is.
They are an underrated organisation. There are a certain kind of purist type who say, oh, well, they're the sister movement of Turning Point USA, and they've got Charlie Kirk, and he's a fake conservative. Don't bother with all this culture war stuff. Look at the individuals and what they are doing.
And look at what exactly it's all down
doing is action,
to what the work people are doing. Because as I keep mentioning, it's an uncomfortable subject, this, Alex.
Yes.
And people don't like to talk about the children. As you know, like for years, the minute you start talking about the children and raising awareness, you're attacked by the trolls. People close down. They don't want to talk about it. But all that we've been saying over these years, that if we don't talk about it, we're complicit, and it's going to continue. People spent so much time talking about that lunacy that went on for 2 years, the nonsense, and then the things from the MZAM, and all the deaths. People, yes, all are very, very, very important, but every single day that goes past, another children are being a little bit more groomed.
You could find the intersection of that.
To talk about it, it has to be. We've got to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, they are going to continue. And Sandy made a good point earlier. These people have got the funds of George Soros to push this agenda. Here we are having to sit up for 36 hours to raise awareness to support the only group at the moment that's managed to get it to the courts, Public Child Protection Wales, the ones that are going to go and take it all the way through the appeal courts and raising awareness. They do skate-athons to raise money. They do cake sales. They'll have picnics. They'll have fun days. Kat's partner did a marathon walk, didn't he?
Yeah, and we've got 40 miles.
Yeah, and we've got Garrett.
Garrett is doing 180 miles.
180 miles. This is, and we're having to go up by the government, who are paying, well, not us, the Public Child Protection Wales, are going up against the government's barristers, and they've got the huge legal team. All this funding from this community. It's an absolute David and Goliath scenario, and that we're going to be here for 36 hours. We're going to lose our minds.
You will. I'll be all right.
Of course you will. Remember, she said that. Can we just get a little record that she's?
It's on record.
But this is what we're having to raise, so this can continue. It's seriously backward, isn't it?
Of course, but I'm afraid this flushes out that a lot of people don't care about children. Let's be honest. Most people contrive to have children. Does that mean that they are good parents? That's one of the shibboleths or taboos of our society, particularly to impugn a mother's love for her children. But let's leave the sexual or the sex divide out of it. Are most modern Western parents, modern British parents, good parents? Do they put their children first? Right,
I know. They've been influenced by their surroundings as well, and it's come down, hasn't it? It really has, and you're right. As much as I want to think that, every single, well, I know that there are obviously the predators out there who don't care about children, but every single parent should be on board with this. And the fact that they're not, all right, some people just don't believe it's happening and they bear it. But even so, the decent thing to do at that stage would be, well, all right, I have to look at it, because if that is true, and it's like not even deniable though, we're witnessing it. If you've got eyes, you can see what's going on. Do you know what I mean? But even from that point of view, you're right. If you just a little 10-minute look, actually, just a little, you would think, hang on a minute, what's going on? These are my kids. These are my kids. I got to make sure that I get up and do something about it. Yeah. But most people just bury their heads in the sand
and put them in front of the television.
But a lot of school teachers, and in the medical context now, a lot of doctors will say to parents in any kind of complaining situation from birth onwards, they're not just your children, they belong to the government too.
Yeah, they do, I suppose, and they do.
That's enunciated by a few of the worst teachers and doctors, or the most honest of the bad ones. but it's obviously in the mind of the population as a whole. And you hear parents trotting out such lines, not that they mean particularly much harm by it, but certainly in church settings in the past, I've when discussing, who has rights over schooling, I found parents, not wicked, but just stupidly parroting, well, they belong to the state, don't they? So it's gone deep into the cultural world. Yeah.
They've been sort of groomed into thinking that that's just a normal thing, and it's a really dangerous time, isn't it? Just everything aside, this is.
And what hope, you see, that we've got woke judges, the woke judiciary, we've got, police going around with the rainbow flags on their lapels. We're coming up to that time of year again when not even your pets are safe, because last Pride year, they were even advertising on Dreamies cat treats. I actually phoned up Mars, it is, who owned Dreamies, and I actually phoned and asked why they felt the need that they needed to promote the LGBTQ community to cats. And I do know now that they are actually having litter trays put in classrooms. That has been confirmed.
The part of the furry,
that they are putting,
which is adult sexual fetishism. It's fetishism, or it was, and now that you've got children identifying as furries, cats, dogs, whatever, and they're actually having litter trays put in the classroom, and it's just, I can't believe
you can't believe we're actually sitting here saying these things. It sounds like,
well, it just sounds made up, doesn't it? It doesn't sound that that's like really happening, especially to the older generation. They're probably thinking, what a load of, but it is.
And do the children in question use the litter trays?
I don't know.
I don't know how that works.
No, I know.
We need to find out about that. Actually,
yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? Because otherwise, they'd have to literally, if they're identifying as a cat and they really believe they're a cat, then they're going to pull their trousers down in front of maybe it's not in the class, maybe it's like in a room or something, maybe it's in a cubicle, maybe. I don't actually know.
We'll have to look into that more, but they are supplying litter trays.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, my suspicious mind goes straight to, if that is the setup, then who's hidden the camera? That's, I'm afraid, the first thing that comes to my mind now.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to have a look at that, because it does, because they'd have to be at least naked from the bottom. To go
I
to
just
the
want
toilet,
a quick thank you again to Richard Vobes, and welcome to Richard Vobes viewers. We are Liberty Tactics. We are here with Public Child Protection Wales. We do not have a YouTube channel. Well, I think we did about 10 years ago, but we were taken down. We do broadcast on Rumble. We've been very active since 2012. 13 Liberty Tactics were launched, and here we are. We're on YouTube. Welcome to everybody, and thank you for the support and the funds coming in. As you say, we're raising this money to help a group of 5 parents who have taken it upon themselves to go up against the Welsh Government to try and stop the RSE education going in to schools where children of the age of 3 years of age will be taught about masturbation and gender ideology. And I feel at Liberty Tactics, we've always been about the children and trying to expose, the disgusting trafficking and abuse of children for 10 years now, that we need to get behind this campaign. So we do this fundraiser. This is our third one, 36 hours.
Third and final. To
help these parents pay their legal costs to go up against the Welsh Government, bearing in mind the Welsh Government have got
bottomless purse
from taxpayers' money, and obviously the funding behind that kind of a community who want this gender ideology done. They've got a lot of funding. Well, unfortunately, these 5 parents don't have that. They're all working, and I wanted to do my bit because I don't think it's fair for 5 parents to take the burden of that, when at the end of the day, the exposure that they're getting through this court case, they will take it to the highest court in the land. They're never going to stop fighting for this. And we don't think it's fair that 5 parents should just have that burden. And we're only a tiny little podcast, and we just want to do our bit to raise awareness. And that's why I'm thanking Richard Vobes and his listeners for jumping over and saying hello.
Share it on the platforms.
Share it, because we are, if you don't know, we are completely censored absolutely everywhere. Nobody sees our stuff anymore. So anyway, sorry, Alex, I just had to do that little plug.
Of course, we have to remind people what the podcast is for. And while you were running through there the sequence of legal challenges, I don't know what your legal advice is at the moment on whether you could ultimately take it to Strasbourg or not, because of course that's separate from the EU, and we are still governed by the European Court of Human Rights jurisdiction, separate from the EU. However, the current government has said for a while now that it wants to remove people's right to take their government to court at Strasbourg in some circumstances. So I don't know what your intention is.
There has been talk about that, Alex, actually. We intend to do that. We're at the appeal stage at the moment, so it's been put in front of a judge. It is taking a little bit of time, and I'm wondering if, because at the same time, the last couple of weeks, or the last month, I would say, it's really kicked off a lot about what's going on with this education, and just with the, introduction to children from drag queens, for example, that has really blown up the last month or so. So there's a lot of things going on at the moment, which is it's gonna make that decision for that judge really difficult if they were planning on saying no and we're not giving you permission to appeal. Put it that way. So I don't know what's going on, but we are just waiting. We're waiting to see if we can go through. We'll just go wherever we need to go. And yeah, Strasbourg has definitely been something that's been spoken about. Although
once you've exhausted the domestic legal remedies, so they're told you can't appeal any higher, or you get as far up the chain as you can with appeals and get it refused, it's a possibility if the government hasn't squashed it yet, because domestically they're trying to squash judicial review as well, where judicial review is the par excellence, the way in which, for example, the Welsh government or Caerphilly Council or whoever take a random decision and that's not equitable, and there's several doctrines, like fairness and reasonableness and all these kind of things. If it doesn't meet those, you can automatically go for judicial review, or on the continent it would be administrative law that sorts that out.
Well, that's what we did. It was the judicial review. We're appealing the decision from the judicial review because obviously they went against us, didn't they, last December? So that is what we're currently appealing at the moment. So we'll take all the necessary things we have to do.
But one of the arguments,
Strasbourg.
One of the arguments the government had was that it wasn't in 52 countries, but we've now got that. They got that, didn't they, in court? That they ended up admitting it. They were shut down.
So that's in case law,
That's
effectively.
now in case law that this education has come from a global agenda.
Whereas they were lying.
Before the Strasbourg things, we do have the rally that Public Child Protection Wales are going to be putting on the 17th of May. Kimberly came on first thing this morning just to run through it, that she's completed the very long document and forms that have to be completed to hold the rally outside Parliament on the Wednesday. Those forms are being filled in, and we're hoping to get quite a crowd outside Parliament. We've got people coming from all over the country, from Wales, Scotland, all over the place, to come up and be outside Parliament on the 17th of May, and it'd be obviously Prime Minister's question time on a Wednesday, because we have to stand up. The children can't do it for themselves. We've got to do this, and I'm noticing, that people are saying about homeschool your children. I know that I know people don't listen, but there are some people who do follow the guidelines that the local education authority put out. And I do believe it's gone into the homeschooling, hasn't it?
Well, that's what the schools bill was about. So they kind of saying that, you still have to, but I mean, I wouldn't, obviously, and I home educate my daughter. There's no way they'd not my daughter telling me to do it. But that's what they intended to do. They wanted every child on a register, every home educated child on a register by, it was April this year, actually. So the schools bill, I don't think it's gone through, but obviously that is what they're pushing for. So I understand I'm in a really good position. I was able to home educate my daughter, but there are people in positions where they are unable to, we know that the state has purposely made the mother go out to work as well, broke the family down so they can take the child in the first place. So they've made it really difficult, the cost of living crisis. Do you know what I mean? People are struggling to eat. So to be able to home educate their child then is another thingy. And this, and there's a lot of children out there in the care system who they're not able to be home educated by anyone. And we got to protect the children even if they're not your own, So it is all about raising, but I do understand, and I would give that advice myself. If you're able to, 100% take them out, 100%. But if you're not, we have to work together, and maybe we'll have some community schools separately from their school system and do it that way.
So just because people have done that, we can't forget their children. You know, their parents have got to, where there's circumstances where they've sent their children to school. So, you know, we could all be saying, oh no, we just homeschool. You know, we do have to support the children. You know, it's not about the parents or whatever. It's about the future generation. And every single day, these children being exposed to this. I mean, what psychological damage it's frightening to think that's going to come out of this, Alex. You know, little 3 and 4 year olds being told that men can have babies, and, you know, thoughts.
Well, I mean, you mentioned COVID and that debacle a while ago, and we have some indication, not that I'm any psychologist, but we have some indication of the damage to children from absurd situations from that. You know, and as you were quite rightly saying a moment ago, people were all too willing to go into the minutiae of COVID and ignore what was happening to the children. And that prompted 2 London mothers actually to write a book called The Children's Inquiry, which is a very sad read, going into the particular harms that COVID caused children, particularly psychologically. And the reason they wrote that with that deliberately provocative title was to say, well, the government didn't bother doing one, so here we are. So we see that, you know, once again, the damage to children is bottom of the list.
Yeah.
And so when people are pushing the sexualization, it is for the gratification, and I don't always mean in the sense of sexual titillation, but the wider sense of feeling that they've got their say, the gratification of the activist adults. You know, that is not a negligible slice of adults in the West, certainly not in perverse Britain anymore. You know, I'd say a sizable minority of British adults now are activists with a particular axe to grind. We're no longer the apolitical people that we used to be. You know, a very large number of us, perhaps not the majority, but a sizable minority, are focused on getting our way with our particular campaign. And sod the children is the attitude.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Alex, thank you so much for coming on tonight and supporting us and sharing this live link. If you wouldn't mind as well, continue sharing. We've got to raise awareness. We have to raise awareness. We have to get people up and doing something, because it's a difficult subject to talk about, but if we don't talk about it, it's going to continue.
I'll leave you with a suitable Welsh proverb that covers the campaign that you've got, which is Dyfal donc a dir a garreg, which means it is persistent blows that shatter the stone.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
And you can catch Alex on the UK column.
Yep. Look forward to seeing you there.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye, Alex.
I'm going to have a coughing fit now. So, Jason, I do believe you've been out on the street. We need to talk to you.